You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Welcome back to On the Way Home. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly, and today we're joined by someone who doesn't just understand the housing landscape in Ontario, she helps shape it. Marlene Coffey, CEO of the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association, is with us to talk about the role of nonprofits in tackling the housing crisis, the challenges and opportunities facing the sector, and what's ahead at ONPHA's annual conference. With hundreds of members across the province, ONPHA has been a powerful voice for affordable housing, and I'm excited to have Marlene with us today. Hey Marlene, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having us. I'm glad it worked out.
Pretty exciting, and I know you squeezed us in. Marlene, to our listeners, Marlene's working fast and furiously to get the ONPHA conference up and rolling, and so we have some pretty exciting talk about that, where Marlene will share with us a few insights into the conference focus. But before we do, I thought it'd be important to connect with Marlene, who, if you come to the ONPHA conference, you'll get to meet her and you can pick her brain more about the sector leadership for Ontario housing. But we're going to start, Marlene, with our signature question. What does home mean to you?
Right. Well, thank you. So by way of self-introduction, I'm Marlene Coffey, CEO with the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association. ONPHA is the term that we use for short. And I've been in the community housing sector for 8 years now, relatively new. I had a long, happy career for 25 years in economic development. And the reason that I'm sharing that with you is that I came to the table, the community housing sector table, with a lot of experience with putting people together to solve problems and to really bring a development lens to the conversation on behalf of housing and housing development. So when I think about home and why that is important to me as a person within this context, home to me is a place where I am safe and I can nurture myself and I can be creative and my authentic self. It's where I can nourish my family and my relationships with friends and, of course, my own kids. So home is ultimately the place that is the foundation for all other success.
Love that. Resonates for sure. ONPHA represents hundreds of nonprofits across Ontario. So I wanted to ask you, what are you most proud of in the sector's progress over the past year? Actually, before we dive into that, I just want to say to the listeners, today we're having a quick conversation to hear about the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association and the important work they do, and we're going to be taking a deeper dive later this year before the end of the year to hear even more of the data and policy advocacy and different pieces that are going on there. But maybe, Marlene, for today, you can share with us what you're most proud of in the sector's progress over this past year.
Well, we represent the community housing sector. For our listeners, that includes your community housing providers is the term that we like to use. Landlords is something that might be familiar more broadly to those listeners. And we are part of the local housing corporation landscape. So those are the providers that are owned and operated by their local municipalities. We include true independent not-for-profit housing providers as well as supportive housing providers. And those in combination are represented by our association. You can think of us like a chamber of commerce. We represent our members. Our members happen to be the community housing sector. We are, as a collective, representing over half of all community housing stock in the country. And so the Ontario landscape is very, very important as a key stakeholder in the national conversation. around the future of housing and housing affordability. In Ontario, our membership is in many hundreds. Our members are, for the most part, operating very large and complex housing portfolios. We are across the province, and we represent everything from a large housing provider to mid-sized to smaller providers. And the complexity is great, and the opportunity in there is equally great. I can talk to you about that in a minute. So what I'm most proud of, which was your original question to me, is that we've really become better at articulating who we are and what we can do as part of the solution to the housing crisis. And so to roll back on what that means, it means that we own and operate $38 billion of assets. And I'm just going to pause on that for a moment. Because when we think about any landlord that has $38 billion in assets, there's incredible opportunity to leverage that into a future. And so we are at a special point in time where for the most part, our members are coming out of mortgage that are 30, 40 plus years old, those mortgages. And it means that we now have a period of renewal where we can renegotiate financing and funding, knowing that we own and operate that kind of scale with an asset base. And that can really leverage us into what the next 30 years look like, and ensuring that we can build a system that's sustainable for housing affordability long-term in the province of Ontario.
And could I ask, when you say the 38 billion, do you know roughly off the cuff how many units that actually translates into in the, housing portfolio?
In the collective units?
Yeah.
I don't know off hand, Emmy. I'd have to look into that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's cool. Like when you said over half of the whole country's stock, that's, pretty amazing. From your vantage point, what role should ONPHA be playing in shaping the next decade of housing solutions?
Well, again, when we look at the history of how community housing came to be, there was a period of major investment by the federal government post-war. As we were thinking about building communities after people were returning home. And that period of investment had a peak and it ebbs and flows. And then we've basically had a de-escalation of investment into the community housing stock, which has really put us in the place where we are today. And so what that means is that we've seen a renewed interest as our communities are talking about the need for affordability. That need is changing. So what was one time impacting those at the bottom of the income ladder has now really become a conversation about those are impacted in the middle class. Working class families are now looking for housing affordability. So it's changed the dialogue a little bit and really elevated the importance of reinvesting into repair and renewal of existing assets, but also keeping up with supply as demand increases for more construction, new builds of affordable housing. And so our role stepping into the future has been, in the recent past, we really spent a lot of time around educating and advocating for the need for housing affordability. Now I see us moving more into implementation, so getting the job done and partnering and being part of the solution as we build more supply and make sure that we protect the assets we have and, of course, support the corporations we have. So our role at ONPHA, from my view, is really about addressing the intersectionality between federal and provincial policymakers and ensuring that we're able to flow those funds down through municipal governments or service managers, our funding partner here in the province of Ontario, so that we really build out a system that is efficient and stable and maximizing where we put the dollars so that we can get the job done.
When we think about Build Canada homes, and I know there's been, everyone's chatting about it, wondering what it might actually roll out like in real life. I'm interested from your work with the sector. Do you happen to have an idea, if funding weren't an issue, how many, because I remember you did a survey on this, I think last year, how many units do you think that the sector that ONPHA supports would be able to mobilize in a very short amount of time if the investment was there?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because when we are talking across the community housing sector, you'll hear different numbers. You'll hear projections and goals and estimates and what's actually happening. And it can become quite confused. And so, what I will say to our listeners today is that it is really important to be clear about the definition of affordable housing and what it is we're looking to achieve. So I know in the province of Ontario, for example, housing targets were given to each regional municipality, and each local council had to sign off on their commitment to meeting housing targets. And within that, we also want to be clear about how much affordable housing is part of the overall housing target for each local regional municipality. Now, we can talk about targets, but the thing that is important for our membership is to really understand what we can actually do with the land that is already within our portfolios. And so we interviewed our membership, asked them a series of questions, and what we were able to establish is that there's willingness and ability to build 70,000 units on land that is already within the ONPHA community as far as land holding or portfolio. And that could be done in 3 years. So that is a really impressive position to be in when I go back to my original comment about the assets that we have that we can leverage through financing, and the room that we have in the land that's within our portfolios that we can actually achieve these builds. And if we can go to government, upper levels of governments and the private sector, and this is also really important, is that the community housing sector is really good at partnering with the private sector to build affordable housing units, either as the contractor to build the units or to become part of a portfolio within someone else's build, as well as operating units for the private sector. So there are many, many ways that we can get to those 70,000 units in 3 years. We have the interest, we have the capacity, we make great partners, and we have the assets to leverage. So the future to me is very, very bright.
Yeah, it sure sounds like that would be a roaring start. How do you see the provincial and federal housing strategies aligning or not with the realities that nonprofits, that ONPHA is, serving and rallying, what they're facing on the ground?
Well, the opportunity here, particularly as we think about the national housing strategy coming to a close within its 10-year mandate. I think we're at year 8 of a 10-year mandate, and really pivoting now into Canada Build Homes. There's incredible opportunity for us to be clear about how that transition is going to happen, and particularly the transition from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, into Canada Build Homes. So we are doing a lot of work on behalf of our members to advocate for a good transition from one set of programs into another set of programs, so that there aren't any blips in the funding, which can be very, very expensive and cause delays. Our second key point is really around streamlining the development and approvals process. So we hear from our members that we do have some very good, strong members that I would say are repeat builders that know how to do what they do very, very well. And what we want to do is streamline and create efficiencies within Canada Build Homes so that they can become serial builders, if you will. And so we were really pleased with some of the recent announcements that came from the federal government around recognizing the community housing sector, around definitions of housing affordability, and a platform to make it easier for housing providers or developers to come in with portfolios and get their approvals more efficiently and quicker. So we've already had some early results on our advocacy around streamlining and efficiencies. The remaining 2 points that we have made to the federal government that would relay over to the province is really about identifying those federal lands, which they have. The good news is that the transfer of federal lands into development opportunity, half of the portfolio that the federal government has put forward actually sits in Ontario. So Ontario has a really cool opportunity to partner here with the Federal Lands Initiative and the community housing sector to make some of that development happen. And this would be in addition to the projections of the 70,000 units that I just talked to you about. And the final point is really an opportunity around the Federal Acquisition Fund that for us in this marketplace would provide community housing sector an opportunity to grow their portfolios by picking up existing units in the system. We know that we can buy existing properties at a discount, if you will, as compared to having to build something new. And it's in our interest to keep adding to the asset base as a portfolio because, again, all of that can be leveraged through refinancing. So those are the 4 key pillars in our advocacy to the federal government, and all of that would then relay with looking for matching supports to help the province of Ontario reach their target.
Very cool. Maybe we shift focus now a little bit to the members and partnerships. Have you seen innovative models among the members that you feel could be scaled province-wide?
I see lots of creativity. And so what I will say about the community housing sector is I have never seen a group that is so industrious, so creative, and figures out a way to solve problems. The sector is enormously talented at stretching a dollar. And so what that means is that there isn't a singular solution or a single line. What I see our sector doing as a behavior is finding ways to partner. And that means they're partnering either through development or offering services to the private sector developers. I see community housing providers building their own stock essentially at market rates that over time will be transitioned into more affordable housing. As you can imagine, costs keep going up, but in the community housing portfolio, we can protect those costs, and that becomes the future long-term affordable housing. I've seen really interesting work happening around partnerships, like I mentioned, with the private sector and different ways of achieving those housing targets, as well as some environmental builds. So we're hearing from the sector that they can build in long-term affordability by building passive housing or environmentally conscious housing that has resilience built into the structure. And by being able to do that, they can keep their operating costs down, which ultimately protects affordability and rents long term. So keep an eye on the community housing sector and what we're doing, and know that we're a friendly group of people that really do want to spread our wings and make new friends and have some tough conversations about where we can bring value and where we can partner to achieve housing targets.
Yes, friendly but not to be underestimated. At this year's ONPHA conference, I'd love to dive in a little bit to what will be happening there. Our listeners might be wondering where they should be later this month, and this might be a perfect place to be. What themes or priorities would you say are front and center at the ONPHA conference?
Well, once a year, the community housing sector comes together in person. This year, our conference is in Toronto, downtown, October 30th to November 1. And it's really a place to showcase and to network. We have over 30 different sessions that are ranging in theme and subject matter. What we do is bring in experts who are very well versed in the subject matter, and we have a lot of panel conversations, which really are always prompting or probing at the edge of the envelope in terms of best practices and innovation, so sort of leaning into what you had asked before. And so we have about 1,000 people who come out. It's a great opportunity to see what the community housing sector is doing, what we're talking about, how we're pushing boundaries for best practices and doing things better for continual improvement. In the audience, you'll have government officials, policymakers, community housing providers, and all of those who support us in the ecosystem. What we hear from our members that they like best is actually the networking. So something that's a little bit different this year is that we have built some tools and tricks into the programming to help people maximize how they network and how they make good connections that they can follow up afterwards. So again, this is all taking us to a place of implementation as part of solutions and not just talk. The other focus that is coming through our theme this year is really about housing at the heart. And what we're leaning into there is that housing is part of health and wellness. And we know that the healthcare sector and those around healthcare are also having some steep challenges. And there is intersectionality where we can offer some solutions to integrating the healthcare system with the housing system, and finding opportunities to stretch those dollars. So there's a bit of a leaning towards the healthcare system. We've seen some really great innovations with housing developments as part of hospital portfolios. So that is new.
Very cool. Can't wait to hear about those. How do you hope that attendees leave the conference? What actions or commitments are you hoping to inspire at ONPHA this year?
For us, it's about being really clear on our advocacy mandates for the year ahead. We gain intelligence and insight. We're always probing on the innovation piece through our different panel discussions. We like to bring speakers to the sector that are actually not part of the sector, sort of coming from the outside in, because that is how you broaden your thinking and find some new types of solutions. So what people come away with is new contacts, new thinking, a level of energy that helps them get through the next year. And of course, helps us as the sector association really build our own intelligence so that when we're doing our advocacy work with upper levels of government, we're talking real time in terms of practicalities, what's happening, what we need, and how we can help federal and provincial governments meet their housing targets too.
And you did tease a couple things about new features for networking. Maybe they're even in the app, I don't know. But what else would you say is exciting or new at this year's gathering that you think is going to move the needle for members and the sector?
I think there's renewed interest in what Canada Build Homes can mean for us, how we can be part of that future. We've already made some good strides in the early announcements that we've seen around Canada Build Homes. And of course, now the work is to deliver on those funding commitments. We have done extremely well as ONPHA over the last 8 years on our advocacy for funding commitments. $23 billion was committed to the sector. So now it's bringing it to the ground and making it real and practical so that we're delivering results in communities.
So if you're not convinced already, it might be time to think about signing up for the ONPHA conference. I happen to know, because I do have the privilege of serving on the ONPHA board as well, that the applications are actually closing next Thursday. So we're hoping, so that would be the 9th. We're hoping that you will listen and sign up. Marlene, could you tell our listeners where they should sign up? How can we get to the conference?
The easiest way to do that is to visit the ONPHA website, onpha.on.ca, ONPHA. Our website has a link to our conference website. It's easy to register. Registrations are open until October the 9th. And we do very much look forward to your participation and hearing from those who are curious and interested about the sector. So if you're in the community housing sector or want to know more about the sector, come out to the conference. I know you will be absolutely thrilled. We have a trade show with all kinds of vendors who are also bringing really valuable information. And basically, anyone who's in the housing space can benefit from this conference. It's not just for not-for-profits. Landlording is landlording, and we would appeal to a broader audience for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add there that, like, when Blue Door first kind of started trying to see what was going on at ONPHA or participate, we were very much focused on program service delivery. And you almost feel like, well, we're not technically an affordable housing provider, so, you know, do we really have a seat at the table? But for anyone who might be thinking that at the moment, I think there's a huge opportunity in our space to think differently, and we'll touch on that. I actually have a privilege to be on one of the panels where we are going to talk about, you know, organizations that are trying to move even into the space of housing. We need more people creating more non-market housing for those that we serve. And so I think that, you know, what Marlene shared is that the conference does not exclude anyone. So if it's of interest to you, definitely consider signing up. I would say too that it's also a pretty great time together. We have a lot of fun. And bonding times too. So before we close, Marlene, maybe could you share with us what you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges for nonprofits in the next 5 to 10 years?
Biggest opportunity is the asset base and the ability to refinance so that we can afford to do more. That is really taking a approach that is about solving our own problem and building our own future and relying less on tax supported dollars. That's the opportunity. The biggest challenge is that well, how would I say this? The biggest challenge is I think that there's a misunderstanding of what the community housing sector is and what we do and how we do it. We get painted with a very broad brush around stereotypes. And I would say that since I've come to the sector from an economic development lens into the housing conversation and at the table, that the stereotypes are wrong. Sure, there's anomalies that hit the media, but my experience is that the leadership in this sector is absolutely incredible, and the capacity to make change and do right and do it well is at the forefront. And my wish would be that people take the chance to talk to us or come out to a conference and see what we're about. And I know for sure that people would be really, really impressed with what they see.
And we're coming back for a deep dive with you later this year. But if you could leave one message with our listeners, with policymakers, funders, and the public about the role of nonprofits in solving this housing crisis in Canada and Ontario, what would it be?
The message is that the nonprofit sector, community housing sector, is your singular group that will assure long-term affordability in communities for perpetuity. So it's built into the mission and the mandate of community housing providers, and they will ensure long-term affordability. So investing in the community housing sector is absolutely a great place to put your money.
Great. Thank you, Marlene, for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
It's clear the nonprofit housing sector is at the heart of Ontario solutions, and ONPHA continues to be a vital leader in driving change. For our listeners, if you want to learn more or take part in the conversations happening across the sector, make sure to check out the ONPHA conference. You can find more details on their website. And as always, thank you for listening to On the Way Home, a podcast brought to you by Blue Door. Please subscribe, share, and join us next time as we continue to explore the ideas, people, and innovations helping us move closer to a world where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. Thank you.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.